Hello, everybody. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about um, self care, as always, but I realized I didn't do a good job, or I failed to do a job at bridging the gap between, let's say, the common standard of self care, or what we see as self care, and how it's kind of promoted to us, and the more philosophy and study, let's say, of self care. We have definitions on what self care is, and this is great because this allows more awareness for people to start getting into the pursuit of self care. I think that self care is a very tricky thing to even pin down. It's often very elusive in how we look at situations and how we take things on. Um, and so I applaud anybody who's attempted to kind of create a definition or understanding of what this thing is. That being said, I find that the kind of best, let's say, standardized definition of self care normally has the understanding that self care is a mental, physical, and emotional thing, and in that they're very correct. There are, I say, a few key missing elements to this that we want to help to improve our understanding of self care. Again, building on that kind of base knowledge that we have so that it kind of rounds out and it takes the proper, let's say, character that it actually has. Um, in doing this, that's what I'm going to be doing today. So, in doing this, I want to, again, be respectful for the people that have made their decisions and come about their conclusion with self care. And then, additionally, add my insight and understanding to this definition so that we can have something that's more rounded, I'd say. So, starting is let's take a look at the general definition of self care, which is the fact that it's a mental, physical, and emotional thing. I think that's very key. Now, the best way to kind of understand how the rest of the definitions go when they start building on this concept, I'm going to use a physical analogy. So, in soccer, you have the skill of kicking the ball. Originally, if I were to tell you how to kick a ball, it's pretty straightforward because we're talking about the logic of the situation. So you put the ball on the ground, you step, let's say, 3 steps back, you plant when you're walking up to the ball, you plant on your left leg if you're a right kicker, and you're going to put your leg back and swing and kick and do that repeatedly. That's how you kick a ball. Now you know everything about kicking a ball. That's not true, but because we have the logic, we kind of fill in the blanks to what should be in there, and we take our own we take our own experience, and therefore go with it, and that seems correct. However, if we took a look at this more at a physical body level, what would we see? We'd start talking about biomechanics. This is exceedingly complex. We talk about joint angles, force vectors, levers, and all these other kind of things. Action potential. It gets really complex, but this is the language of the body, a complex language. The language of logic is kind of steady in its statements, but loses that technicalness, let's say, for the most part. And then let's take it one step further and we increase the expression, and now we use the language of emotion. So we'd say that, we'd go to a star athlete and say, well, when you kick the soccer ball, what does it feel like? And if they stayed away from the mechanical kind of definition of it, they might say, well, it feels just like a good kick, like you hit the sweet spot. What is the sweet spot? Then we get a little more technical. But if we were going to talk to, let's say, another soccer star, and they're a little bit more, let's say, Alan Watts like in their thinking, they might say, they might get a couple balls, kick a few, and the one that feels correct, they'd say that's what it feels like, that last kick. And then what are we really talking about? We're talking about the symbol of what it looks like to do a good kick, which is often associated with the feeling of something, or let's say the highest potential that something might have. So we get back to the understanding that even if we say things in like the definitional terms, we are just generally outlining the, let's say, symbols that lie in the thing that we're trying to talk about, the feeling of the whole thing. And in this way, self-care is no exception. So when we, let's add a kind of secondary key point based on, let's say, the philosophy of self-care. We'd say self-care is normally solving for the thing that doesn't seem to exist. This is generally what makes it hard to find or see. It is generally solving for the missing piece. Now, what is that missing piece? Where does it go? How is it perceived? That all becomes the fun of delving into self-care. So I wouldn't be able to actually describe to you what self-care is. And this is a trick with kind of how we're trying to, how we are explaining it on the base level. We are saying self-care are these actions, but these actions are just symbolic of what self-care is. They're not self-care really. But if we were to look in the symbolism of, let's say, um, knowledge, well, knowing more about yourself is beneficial because then you can take care of yourself better. When we talk about hygiene, well, hygiene is great because that allows you to physically take care of yourself on that kind of level. We could talk about mindfulness. This is a different kind of pursuit of self-care. Again, it's symbolic of it, so that means that many people might do these actions and not come out with the, let's say, ideal results. They might just add another thing to their plate. And this is why I really wanted to clarify the understanding of what self-care is. The best way I know at this point to kind of highlight when you come across, let's say, the SelfCare Spark, the thing that makes you want to transition into a way of thinking of life with the understanding of self-care in it, is generally, or one example of this would be midlife crisis. So all of a sudden you realize that all the things that you're doing before don't quite add up and it's not quite fulfilling. Therefore, you try to do essentially the opposite of the things that you did before. This, in a way, is the spark. If you just do the opposite and live a life that's very different from how you lived before, you're not quite getting the full mindset of what's behind self-care, but you're starting with very good actions. In doing the reverse, you start to see a whole way of life that didn't exist to you before, but was obviously happening. And this is a powerful way to do it, although I don't think everybody needs to go to the midlife crisis thing to be able to get that understanding. Another way to do this, a little bit more kind of simple, I guess, is calling up a few of your good best friends or people that know you very well and ask them, what was the best advice you gave them? In hearing what they reply, now apply this to your life. Take your own best advice. And as you do this honestly and sternly, you'll start to, again, notice things that you were missing in the way that you're pursuing life. And in this way, we've solved for that missing thing, and self-care will start to show itself because things are starting to get rounded out. In the rounding out process, let's say self-care emerges. I guess that's a good way to put it. Another example of this self-care spark might be a traumatic event. So it's not a midlife crisis, but it's something similar. Something that really makes you think about your previous beliefs of something. In this shaking up of your reality, again, the spark happens. You start to say, well, you know what? I always thought people never listened to me, but if that's true, nobody would ever understand me, but I have friends that understand me. So is it that I'm not speaking up appropriately for myself? This might be true. In starting this process of speaking up for yourself, you start to open new doors, new windows, new expressions, new beliefs, new perspectives. And this is the spark of self-care. If you start continually embodying this into your kind of way of living life, then you'll see more of that spark, solving for the things that were missing previous. Another component to know is that a good amount of experience is needed before you can really delve into the strong benefits of self-care. So you must live life, you must have ups and downs. From these experiences, you can now build on the other side of it. And building that other side, again, the spark of self-care can happen. I think this is very important to put in the understanding of what self-care is, because you might get stuck into thinking that self-care is a specific action, and incorporating these actions into your daily routine, then you are practicing self-care. This would be incorrect. It would be a good start in the idea that you're doing something different, and doing something different generally leads to a different view of things. But mainly, if we're going to get down to the core of this thing, we want to take a look at the beliefs. The beliefs kind of sculpt our personality throughout life, or how we take on life. And in that way, when we challenge these things, we open up kind of new results. right? If we say that we do the exact same thing that we always do, we can't have new results. Then if we do something different, we get new results. The bigger the thing is that we change, the greater the results that we can see. And in this way, we can have a way of thinking about ourselves and about life that leads to a very specific outcome. This specific outcome is always going to have, the original version of it will always have negativity and bad stuff in it. Essentially, this is how we learn. Our reason to learn is to do better, right? To see the positive in something. So from that experience, we could then start to build on what is the positive version of that. Is everybody really grumpy towards me? Is everybody really negative? Am I negative? If I change how I feel, does that change how everything else looks? These kind of things. So I really wanted to kind of bridge the gap between our kind of common definition of self-care and bring it all the way around to more of the philosophy and understanding and let's say concept-based things around self-care as itself, so that you can see a bigger picture and kind of make decisions for yourself about these things. It's very important to gain knowledge, and this way it's powerful, but we ultimately must gain the skill to think about the challenges ourselves and then pursue them. The pursuit will lead to something positive or negative. We should then be able to reassess, rebuild, and move forward from that situation. That is ideally moving towards the potential of humanity, a potential of individual, and this is kind of the pursuit that has always been highlighted in any great endeavor, essentially. So self-care would be something like that, and hopefully this clarifies some things for you, adds a little bit more depth, gives you some more insight into how to start pursuing self-care. Another quick point is that generally self-care seems simple in its term, but you must know about self before you can take care of self. And that is the trick in the wording there. But you can see how that's a lot more complex than we might think. And if we just move off of a place of already knowing all this stuff about ourselves, supposedly, then we end up in the same problem, just in a different place, essentially. So we want to keep that very much in mind as we take on this challenge. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and hope that was powerful to you. Thanks.